My guest today on Creative Inspired Happy is Adam Met, multi-platinum recording artist. He's the A in the band AJR. He's also a professor and now author of a new book, AMPLIFY. Today, we talk about the kinds of books that Adam likes to read, the process of co-authoring a book with another writer, how to outline a nonfiction book, breaking rules to build fan bases, storytelling in songs versus in books, avoiding burnout in creative careers, and how to find your personal happiness and fulfillment in life. Creative Inspired Happy is a video podcast featuring interviews with brilliant, fun authors about what made them fall in love with books, why they write, their biggest successes and disappointments, and of course, their latest books. All hosted by me, New York Times bestselling author Evelyn Skye. Join our warm community for free to get behind-the-scenes insights about author life, book recommendations, the opportunity to ask questions of upcoming podcast guests, and more. Just go to creativeinspiredhappy.com or follow the link in the episode notes. I hope you enjoy the show. Adam, hi, welcome to Creative Inspired Happy. I'm so thrilled to have you here today. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. I'm doing great. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
I'm psyched. I think that you have such an interesting background. I love your book. So Amplify is out now. I actually have an early copy because I was lucky to get an early edition. But this is about using what you've learned from your music career, storytelling, building community and fan bases to do something even bigger than yourself and to build a better world. However, I have a question for you because
Yes.
why write a book? You already have a massive fan base. Like you're a musician, you and your brothers are an AJR, like you founded a nonprofit. Why write a book?
It's such a good question. And it's funny, I get two questions a lot, and we can talk about the second one later. But the number one question I get is, you do climate work, you do advocacy, and you do music. What's the relationship between the two? And I always give the answer that I don't really see them as different things. And you can probably tell from the book that they really are the same thing in my mind. That kind of creative ideation, living in that creative space, is for movement building, it's for climate, it's for any kind of action that you want to take in the world, and it's for music. Because building a fan base, when you're building a fan base for music, it's not very different from when you're building a fan base for a sports team or building an audience for a movie, or when you're trying to get people to protest or participate in an organization or do any kind of action, bring people together. It really is the same thing. It's how do you build an audience? How do you touch people emotionally? What are all the different tactics that you can use? And I wrote a book because I was tired of explaining this to people.
I mean, I do think that books are, because they are longer form, you can get a lot more complicated ideas down. Whereas, as much as I love, the different ways that we have to reach audiences these days,
Yeah.
sometimes a 15-second video can't really do justice to the more complex ideas that you want to convey. And I think that there's so much in here. There you can enjoy this book on different levels. For the writers in this audience who are listening, you can enjoy it in terms of, how can I build a fan base? How do I convey the story that I want to tell? And if I have a message to go along with it, how do I do that through the narrative? And then for the readers in the audience, obviously just enjoy the book. There's so much to learn from it. I have, a teenage daughter. I feel like her
Yeah.
friends are they're going to take a lot from it. Um,
The other thing
I
that was
do.
so interesting for me in terms of the writing of the book itself is that it helped me to clarify so many of my ideas. When I'm in front of different audiences, I talk about all of these issues all the time, whether it's in music or bringing people together, finding your audience, how to use the role of emotion, anything. But to be able to actually sit down and put it into words and revise it has made me a better speaker, has made me a better presenter, and has helped me to refine my own ideas in a way that I never would have been able to do if I hadn't written this book. So this book is really just, as much as it is for other people, it was also an incredible exercise for me.
I've heard that a lot actually from other writers as well, where sometimes you have something that's like really meaningful to you in your soul. And once you articulate it on the page, you actually develop that idea even more for yourself. You understand a little bit more what it was what your purpose is, or, what you're trying to say by trying to figure out how to clearly communicate it to others.
Yeah, completely.
Okay. So have you always been a reader?
I've always been a reader. I love reading. It's funny, during elementary school, I was really obsessed with audiobooks. So during elementary and middle school, my first audiobooks were the Harry Potter series because Jim Dale was the actor who was reading the books, and I just loved how he did all of the voices. And then I've just been obsessed with audiobooks since, and I go back and forth. I have periods where I read books and then I listen to the audiobooks, and you can see from behind me, for those of you who are looking at any of these video clips, you can see there's so many weird books behind me. They're like super technical books, and there's philosophy that I read as an undergrad, and then there's kind of like young adult fiction that I just find fun because I like the storylines, and there's religious books, there's cookbooks. I love learning about a person through their writing and how they want to put themselves out in the world through their writing. And traditionally, that's so different from who they are as a person when you meet them. And I like exploring all of these different sides of people.
I mean, I can tell you are a devourer of knowledge. I love that about you. Okay, what do you do with all your books? If you run out of space, how do you decide what to keep and what do you give away?
That's such a good question. I had such a hard time when I was moving, when I didn't have as much space for books in this apartment. I went to the Strand and brought a whole bunch of books to the Strand. I donated a lot of books. And the books that I tend to donate or give away are the ones that I've read so many times that I feel like I know them so well, or the ones that I've only gotten a little bit through and I feel like I'm never going to read. But don't tell anybody.
No, don't ever tell the authors that, but I actually
Yeah,
fully endorse that because here's the thing, not every book is for every person, right? And that's actually helped
totally.
me as an author because I know that in my book club, for example, so many intelligent people and we'll all have completely different opinions. And I think
Yeah,
that for me, that made it okay as an author to get reviews that sometimes someone's it's a 2-star, and for this another person, the exact same book is a 5-star. It's okay.
totally.
You can move on. There are so many great books in the world. I
Yeah.
want to talk about the writing of the book. So
Hmm.
you worked with Heather Landy. She's a senior editor at Bloomberg, the first person that you thanked in your acknowledgments, and you said that this book wouldn't exist without her. What was the relationship and what's the process like? Where were you doing the interviews together? And I want to talk about the interviews as well later, but like,
Yeah.
how did that work?
Yeah. So almost all of the interviews we did together, there were only one or two where I did but one or two by myself and she did one or two by herself. But the thing about working on a book with a journalist is that she pushed me to the extent of my kind of thought process, which was so helpful. She would push back on everything. And one of the things that I really kind of live by, and I learned this from one of my friends, is that I'm very open minded. I'm open minded to so many different types of ideas, but only if you can convince me of their validity. I'm open to being convinced, but you have to put the work in to try and convince me if you're trying to get me to change my mind about something. And Heather was so good at convincing me when she said, okay, I think this chapter, maybe we should move it in this direction. And we would have a very friendly fight about it. And I was more than willing to go in the direction that she said. And when you have a partner like that that you trust so deeply, it makes the process so much more fun. You know, and I don't hate on anybody who kind of sits down and does a kind of whole interview and then somebody else writes the book completely for them. But in my mind, a collaborative process ends up having this 1 + 1 = 10 effect. Because when you allow each other to grow and have other ideas that each of you can bring to the table, it ends up being this beautiful kind of creative project as opposed to just one person's voice the whole time.
So how did it work? Let's say so you've done the interviews. How
Yeah.
did that work in terms of the writing of each chapter?
Yeah. So the writing of each chapter, it depends on the chapter. So we would sit down and we would outline every single thing together. So we would say, okay, what is the narrative arc of this chapter going to be? And for those of you that haven't read it yet, the first couple of chapters are about finding your own space in movements, in collaborating, in collective, in this idea of building a collective. And the first chapter is really about what is the vision of the world that you want to build? How can you define that? The second chapter is about what is the role that you're going to play in helping to achieve that vision. But then the rest of the chapters in the book are all of these very concrete tactics that the music industry is so good about. But in every single chapter, there are a lot of stories to help illustrate why the music industry is good at these tactics and then how we can apply them. So we really wanted to make sure that structure played its way through the book. What are the stories from the music industry that are going to get people excited to say, oh my God, Taylor Swift did this. Oh my God, Bob Dylan did this. And then in the second half of the chapter, make sure we get through kind of the theory and the technical pieces of it, but tie it back to, okay, if you want to participate in a movement, how can you do that? And in some chapters, there's checklists. In some chapters, there's literal games that you can play by going back through the book and playing these games throughout all the different chapters. There's all of these kind of concrete, really sticky ways of participating. And as we were outlining together, we wanted to make sure there was a way for every single tip we were giving in the book to have something that was implementable. So we would sit down and go through it together. And sometimes I would write a first draft, and sometimes she would write a first draft, and then we would trade, and then we would edit, and then we would give it back to each other. So the process really was like fully collaborative, and I'm really thankful for that.
I mean, I think you did a marvelous job. The voice is very consistent throughout, but it's also very personal. When I was reading it, I felt like I was listening to you. I felt like we were here hanging out and you were just telling me all these things. And it was great. And what I think works really well, especially in nonfiction like this, is your combination of storytelling and then, like you said, with the kind of actionable tips, which is the kind of thing I usually see in like business books, you know, where they say, like, okay, and this is how you become a good leader. And at the end, here's the bullet points of what you do. But
Yeah.
I thought that this worked fantastically in this book, that combination.
Oh,
So
thank you
you
so
talked
much.
I love it. So you talked a lot about the outlining process, and you also interviewed so many fascinating people. I have to admit, when your
Mm,
publicist sent it to me, I was like, yeah, okay, Adam met. This is interesting. Wait, he talked to Adam Grant? Because I'm a huge fan of Adam Grant. He's an organizational psychologist at Wharton, for anyone who doesn't know. His podcast is the reason I started this podcast, because I thought, oh,
wow.
you can have a podcast that is like varied on different, you have different guests, and you can delve deep and have this like very intelligent but accessible conversation. So once I saw Adam Grant and Adam met, I was totally in. But you also talked to Bill Nye, the science guy. You talked to Jim Gaffigan. You talked to Ben Folds. At what point during this process of outlining did you decide who to interview? Did you have the interview list first and then you built out the book? Did you already build out the book and the outline with Heather and then to say, okay, who do we fill it in? How did that work?
That's a great question. So I had a network of friends and colleagues that I thought could contribute interesting things. There was actually a full chapter of the book that didn't end up making it in. We got rid of a whole chapter and incorporated things back through. And that's what I think is really great about the editing process of a book. And the way the editing worked with in terms of the different people that we interviewed, we had this initial list. And then we said, okay, wouldn't it be amazing if we had a songwriter to contribute to that section of explaining all the different ways that songwriting happens? And so then we brought in this songwriter who was written for everyone from Katy Perry to Panic at the Disco to Carole King, and he was able to contribute. So we had this outline of all the people we wanted to include. And then we said, okay, these are the other points we want to make. How can we have experts come in and fill in those gaps? And Jim Gaffigan was one of those people. I mean, Jim and I had kind of connected initially over Twitter, when I think it was called Twitter. And so we were just chatting a little bit, and his kids, you know, are fans of AJR, and that's so great. But I really wanted to get an outside the music industry input on how he thinks about his audience, and how he thinks about his audience. They're really just like-minded people, right? It's just such a different perspective from how a bunch of the artists that we have in the book think about it. Bill Nye is another great example. Somebody so different. He's a scientist, but he's not a scientist who's sitting behind a desk doing technical work. He's a scientist that, for me, was one of my inspirations when I was in fourth grade, because he knows how to communicate to everybody. So finding people that brought unique perspectives to it were key. Adam Grant was a specific situation. So Adam Grant, because he's so good at what he does, I went in and wanted to ask him very specific questions. So I asked him very specific things about different social movements, about how they grow, how they change, how to find your own role in things. And I felt like before I interviewed him, from his experience in business psychology, that he would be able to apply a lot of those answers to movement building, and he was. So some people I just wanted to hear their story, and some people I wanted them to weigh in on specific points. And I was very specific about how I chose which person to do for which one. I mean, there's an amazing, amazing story with a gentleman named Efren, who was a journalist and a lawyer, and he has basically done this incredible work around immigration, and making sure that we're protecting immigrants' rights. And the way he told his story in the book, I'm not going to give it away because there's like a really strong punchline in there. You're going to have to read it. But somebody like that, to be able to incorporate their voice into the book was just so important for me.
No, I mean, I really appreciated all the different perspectives. I think it made the book so much richer. But I do have a question because you are, as you put it, relatively successful. Although, let's be honest, you're very famous. And your brothers are very famous. All these other people that have been interviewed for the book, most of them are also very famous. How does someone who is not famous yet, a lot of the writers who will be watching and listening to this show who are maybe just starting out or who have a modest, fan base, or a reader, someone who is a quote unquote normal person, how does this book apply to them?
That's also such a good question, and it's why we started off the book with, what do you care about? It's not about what the rest of the people in the world care about. It's, what do you care about? What is in your community that you see that you want to change? What is it that your friends and family care about? And then in that second chapter, what are the skills you have? Whether you're a student or if you're an accountant or a lawyer or an artist, whatever it is, that second chapter helps you take all the skills you have and make them useful in order to build a better world. This book is not just for people who have built movements and they're the leaders of movements, although there are some tips in there if you want to start a movement that you want to be the leader of. Really, it is, you know, you are a citizen of the earth, you care about the planet, you care about your community. How can you contribute? I do this thing when I go to colleges and I give lectures. So many students don't see how what they're studying in school can apply to movement building and, in particular, climate. And so what I do is I literally ask them this question, and then I go around the room and go person by person and say, okay, what are you studying? What are you studying? And somebody will say, oh, I'm pre-med. Like, doesn't have anything to do with climate. And then I'll go person by person and explain to them how their area of study can actually contribute effectively to something like climate or any other number of social issues. All of these systems are so interconnected that if you care about anything, I'm sure the skills that you have can actually be applied to make a difference. And this is really what the core of this book is about. Anybody that cares about anything at all, you already have these skills to help make the world a better place.
I think that's a really important message. And I think also, you're talking about, individual people, the change that we want to affect, it doesn't have to be worldwide, right? It could be in my
No.
local city. It is, as you said, what do you care about personally, right? Like, it is sometimes too daunting to think, oh my gosh, well, Adam wants me to go change the world. All right, guess I got to suit up. I
Yeah.
really love the actionable steps. So when I read nonfiction, because I'm usually a fiction reader and I'm a fiction writer, I tend to read just from beginning to end. And
Hmm.
my husband reads more nonfiction. And sometimes I'll be reading something and not your book, but a different nonfiction book. And I'll get kind of stuck, in a chapter that I'm like, oh, too
Sure.
many like academic studies or whatever. And he said to me, you don't have to read nonfiction in order, right? There's a table of contents and you can skip around, and sometimes maybe the right entry point for someone is to say, okay, you know what? I want to know first about Adam and music and what he and his brothers built. So maybe they don't start in chapter 1 and 2. Maybe they skip, and they go ahead and they go to 4, 5, 6, and then they go back. I don't know. What's your opinion on that? Is that really, really awful?
No, I don't think that's awful at all. It's funny, I just got a book on climate finance that arrived yesterday, and I went straight to chapter 6 because I was really interested in green bonds. And this is a really technical thing. I mean, we can cut this out of the podcast if you want, but I totally jump around based on the thing that I'm interested in. For my book, I highly recommend reading the introduction and chapter 1 and 2 in order because those give you a really good grounding of what you're going to find. But then the rest of the chapters, chapters 3 through 11, are all of these different tactics. And if you find yourself being interested in the live space, how do I bring people in person? You can skip right to that chapter. If you're really interested in gamifying things, you can skip right to that chapter. I do not mind skipping at all, but I would say intro 1 and 2 are pretty key to understand how this book works.
I appreciate that, especially because you and Heather thought so much into writing the outline, the structure of this book. I do want to dive into some of the chapters, but before that, I have a question
Yes.
before I forget. For fiction, do you ever read the end first, especially if it's a thriller? And are you really nervous and you think, I gotta know?
Okay. The only book I ever read the end first of was the sixth Harry Potter book when Dumbledore died. And I knew from the beginning that Dumbledore died. That was such a mistake. So I've never read the end of a book first since that because that was a huge
Okay,
mistake.
good lesson. Good
Yeah.
lesson.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the chapters that you wrote, which I thought was so fascinating and such a different way of thinking, was I think it's chapter 3, Waxing Lyrical. And you go through different songs and you talk about storytelling. You look at the lyrics of the song, the way that the music was written, and how the context, historical context of how it's performed in terms of how the artist's message was conveyed. Sometimes it was very like like on the nose and explicit. Sometimes it was really subtle. How did you come up with this idea for this chapter? And then how did you choose which songs? Because I mean, there's obviously a vast catalog of music to choose from.
This was a really hard chapter to write for that exact reason. There were so many songs that I wanted to put into this chapter, but basically, we boiled it down to a handful of techniques. And the handful of techniques are the storytelling in a song can be ultra specific and about a really concrete and small story that people can then blow up and apply to their own lives. It can be really big and general that they can see their own lives within. It doesn't have to be about the story of the song itself. It can be about the way that the song is performed. So Billie Holiday is a perfect example. And when I talk about the story in this book, one of her goals was to make her predominantly white audiences really uncomfortable with how she performed her song. She performed Strange Fruit at the end of her set. She didn't do an encore. She didn't bow. She didn't do anything at the end. The lights just went off, and the audience didn't really know what to do. It was a form of protest in and of itself. Then you have something like Hamilton, where Lin-Manuel Miranda performed it at the White House during the Obama administration. And Jon Stewart comes out and says, this is ridiculous. It's not the right time for, a founding father who is not the same race as the founding father actually was to be singing about this. And then 6 years later, there's an amazing video clip of him and Obama backstage at Hamilton raving about it. That was a case of really understanding when the audience is ready for it. Not trying to teach an audience a lesson about something, but really understanding when the audience is ready for something. And then, kind of the last big one is Tracy Chapman. Fast Car is an incredible song. And it got to number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. But when Luke Combs, who's a country artist, redid it in 2022, it got to number 3. It got even bigger. And the really kind of key understanding here is that it doesn't matter about a song, like what audience it ends up reaching, but this song ended up reaching different audiences at different times, and the story was the same. It was about a young woman who was living in poverty in a very difficult relationship with her partner, with her parents, trying to escape. And it resonated so well for a country audience at 2022, and it resonated so differently for Tracy Chapman's original audience. Exactly the same song. He didn't even change the lyric, I worked in the market as a checkout girl. He kept that original lyric when he redid it. So all of these different kind of tactics for telling stories I haven't seen in kind of one place before, right? So this is why I wanted to use songs, whether we're talking about Bob Dylan and Phil Oakes and their relationship, or people like Billie Holiday or Lin-Manuel Miranda for Hamilton, or Tracy Chapman and Luke Combs. Each of these are different storytelling techniques. And as you're telling stories as part of a movement, or even if you're a songwriter, the way to think about the intention behind a story is so key because it's going to resonate with your audience in completely different ways. This is one of my favorite chapters in the book because I think about this all the time, and it was really fun for me to put it into words.
No, I mean, that's so interesting. I think people are going to love this because I know in our community, we have a lot of novelists, we have nonfiction writers, we also have some songwriters. And
Hmm.
like you said in the beginning, they're, you know, when you are a creative person, you're not siloed just in songwriter.
Yeah.
Like you have songwriters who want to write books, who want to tell stories in other ways. And I'm actually curious, through your own experience in your band, what have you learned about storytelling structure in maybe such a short form like a song? How do you convey something
Yeah.
so in such a short period of time, like 3 minutes, 5 minutes?
Yeah, so this is such an interesting question. So I am not the songwriter in the group. My brothers are the songwriters. I do a lot of the kind of big picture thinking of how do we create a campaign, rolling out an album, doing the tours, thinking about the marketing strategy. How do we tell the story of the band, of everything else, and have the songs be the driver? And one of the things that I talk to them a lot about is okay, we have these songs and they're living separate from the tours, from the merchandise, from everything else. How do we convey something through the song, but also how do we put out songs that can also be conveyed in a really special way on stage that are not just playing the songs? So our stage shows are a complete narrative story, and there's a through line, and there are emotional ups and downs, and it uses these different songs to convey different emotions. And then as we're doing an album campaign, we have all of these different ways of engaging the fans in different kinds of activities that furthers the story, right? So our last album, Maybe Man, is like about this kind of big, sad superhero that is really self-reflective, and all of these songs reflect that. But then the storyline of the show also reflects that. And what's on our merchandise also reflects that. How we did our digital campaign and our content and our music videos. Music videos are a whole nother medium for conveying something even beyond the song. So what it is really is stories on stories on stories, and people pick out different things from it. The same thing can be said of movements, right? So when you see the reasoning behind why a movement is built, that's one story. And then how different people participate in it is another story. And how you create digital content is another story. And how it evolves to kind of participate with other movements and what these communities look like. All of these are different stories that end up working together. And then how you tell the story of that whole thing. There's an amazing piece of the book. Sandy Hook Promise is an amazing organization based in Connecticut. After the school shooting in Sandy Hook, they created this organization to try and prevent future gun violence in schools. And they ended up telling amazing stories using PSAs. These PSAs actually won Emmys because of the storytelling. So it's not just about creativity in storytelling and the creative arts. It's about how can we use all of these tactics and apply them to build a better world for all of us.
I think another thing that you're really good at is breaking rules, maybe in a respectful way. Not just like you said, you and your brothers, you don't trash hotel rooms. But talk to me a little bit about what you've learned in terms of breaking rules in the music industry and how you write about that in this book, how that translates to other people and maybe what they want to do.
Yeah. Breaking rules is such a funny thing, right? Because you want to grow in an industry, and so you feel like you need to follow the rules in order to grow. But in the last 10 or 20 years, so many of these industries, whether we're talking about books or we're talking about music, have been disrupted, right? Because people bring their own audience with them, and therefore they can step outside the boundaries of what's allowed. So I'll tell you one quick story that's in the book. We were opening for an artist, and it was one of our biggest opening slots that we had gotten. And our previous opening slots, we would play our shows and then play our 30-minute set or so before they would come on stage, and then we would come back to that city hoping that people would come out to our show, but it wasn't happening, right? So what we did was we created a real sense of urgency and a sense of demand during our opening set of this tour. We would play our songs, then we would play the biggest one, and right after that, we would say, guess what? Just now, right this minute, we just put a show on sale in this city. There aren't that many tickets. Go grab your tickets now. And because we built up our set to that high point in the set and then announced it and did a small venue and had to go on sale right in that moment, it had people in the audience get really excited. And that tour that we put on sale one show at a time as we were in each city ended up completely selling out. And it was our first sold out tour. And it was the beginning of us growing our audience. That has never been
And
done
for
before.
context, though, exactly for context, you're supposed to, at least the rules say, you're supposed to announce an entire tour all at once with all the tour dates. And so as you said in your book, you were making your team crazy, your managers, because you guys are like, no, this is a better way. Let's do it one at a time.
Yeah, it was so much better of a way because it created that demand in the moment. Our agent was very upset. Our manager was very upset because it took so much more work on their part, but it was the thing that really kickstarted us. And when you figure out ways to drive that energy that you feel instead of waiting 6 months to come back, because they're not going to feel that energy 6 months from now. So if you can find that energy in the moment and capitalize on that, it's really, really great way of breaking the rules.
Yeah, I've actually found that. So the book industry, writers are we follow rules because there's a desperation to get published. You spend so many years of your life dreaming of being an author, writing a book, and when you get a book deal, there's still a little bit of the, oh my gosh, thank you so much. What can I do for you? I'll follow all the rules. And I think that some of the success that I've found is in a similar way being willing to break rules, within a certain boundary, right? Like there's a wisdom that says, oh, you don't start publicizing a book until 3 or 4 months ahead of time. And when my first book came out, which was a decade ago, I said, no, screw this. If we're going to do the announcement that we had a book deal and it's 10 months before the book is coming out, like, I'm just going to start publicizing it now,
Love it.
and that really built up that kind of grassroots, like, fan excitement. And I do think that you have to keep adjusting, right? Because, like, social media changes, people's expectations change. They get kind of like used to things. And then so what you did before, like, hey, free bookmarks, now they're like, oh my gosh, I have so many free bookmarks. But it's that willingness sometimes to say, like, I'm going to do something, and it's going to be different, but I believe in this. And it takes a little bit of boldness, maybe a little bit of confidence, and hopefully you don't piss off too many people, or I don't know, I think maybe you're just very charismatic and everyone's like, guys, don't do this, but fine, we're along for the ride.
It's funny. It's like this book tour. So the book tour is not going from bookshop to bookshop doing signings. It's actually in theaters. And so there's a musical element, there's special guests, there's trivia. So each section of the show really is different elements from the book. So it is like an hour and 15 minutes. You come and you buy a ticket, you get a book with it, and it really is engaging for that, hour and 15, hour and 30 minutes, and you get to participate in advocacy during that show. Everyone is going to do an action together, and I'm going to walk everyone through how to do it. And it's really just an incredible way of kind of merging the two worlds. And most people don't do something like that, right? They'll just kind of go
Yeah.
from place to place. And a reading is great. I've been to many book readings. I love them. Book signings, fantastic. But I wanted to break the rules a little bit and do something that felt more like me. And people were hesitant at first, but now they're all really excited about it.
I think it's fantastic. And, a lot of what branding is nowadays, and I know some people hate the word branding, but it's not only about the book that you've written. It is partially also about you. And you are, in some instances, and I don't just mean you specifically because you're a musician, but like you, the author, are the best messenger for the book, right? Because you are the storyteller. You're the one that this came from. And the book is the thing that people can take home with them and spend more time with you. But I love this idea of making your book tour, making your events very personalized. Okay, so we are running up on time, but I have
Okay,
questions for you from our community. And this is
amazing.
one of my favorite things to do because Creative Inspired Happy is not just a podcast, we're also a virtual community of readers and writers. I always let them know ahead of time who I'm having on the show. And so today we have kind of a fun eponymous structure. So the show is called Creative Inspired Happy. I've got 3 questions for you: one on being creative, one on being inspired, and one on being happy. All right, you ready for this?
Love it. Let's do it.
Okay, so for creative, Alexandra S. wants to know, she says, I'm curious about the longevity of a creative career and how to not feel burnt out after years of being in one. Does creative burnout build up the longer your career goes on, or does one get better at managing that with experience?
Wow, that is a really tough question, but my answer to that is I step away from the type of creativity that I'm working on if I feel like I'm getting close to burnout. And I'll explain what I mean. So, when I was doing a lot of music, I got to a point where I was like, I'm kind of tired of this, being on the road, doing the shows. And that's when I applied to do my PhD. And most people would not think of a PhD as a creative pursuit. But for me, in a PhD, the goal of a PhD is to contribute something to academic literature that has never been said before. So inevitably, you need to be creative. You need to look at the entire landscape of your work and you need to find a gap in it. You need to build something new and different, and that really is creativity. So I will apply my creative skills to a different area in order to try and find new outlets, new ways of applying it when I start to feel a little bit of that burnout. That's my kind of trick.
Fantastic. I love that advice. Okay, next question. This is on being inspired. So, this is a combination of two questions because they're sort of similar. So, this is from Elizabeth and from one of our community members whose really lovely handle is Thoughts from the Graying Morning. And the
Love
question
it.
is there, isn't it wonderful? Is there
Yeah.
an intersection between song ideas and book ideas? How does the writing differ? Because music seems like it can help emotion within storytelling and songs, but how do you translate that into writing a book when there are only words to carry the emotion?
Yeah. Really great question. Love that. Um, so again, just to be clear, I don't do the songwriting. It's my brothers that do the songwriting. So I'm going to channel a little bit of my brothers in this
Steal
answer.
it from them.
Yes, exactly. So one of the things that's unique about their songwriting process, which I love, a lot of artists will write 100 songs and then narrow it down to 10 or 12 songs for an album. They will write 12 or 14 songs and spend so much time on each individual song because they want that gem to be perfect. And they will shape it and refine it and polish it until that thing is really, really beautiful. So there are rarely times where things get thrown away. And honestly, for a book, for me, the process is a little bit different. It's like I have an idea of what I want to say, and then I take that thought process forward and thought process forward and thought process forward. And you can't see because you might be listening to just the audio of this, but I drew this really weird shape in the air that's kind of curvy and has many different sides. And even though it's the same thing that it goes on all of these different tangents and we polish it down and polish it down, it's more of like a journey to me to figure out what you want to get to as opposed to having the center of the circle and then really narrowing down on the center of the circle. I want to figure out how to shape that journey into something. So I guess there are similarities in the kind of polishing and refining piece of it, but for them I feel like they come up with a core idea and really dive into that core idea. And for a book chapter, for me, it's about exploring the journey of it. Does that make sense?
And yes, and then the second part about emotion in music
Yeah.
versus just in words, do you feel, I don't know, do you have any tips on that? Or what has your experience been watching Ryan and Jack and then what
Yeah.
you've done in the book? Because I thought you did a great job conveying emotion in your book.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Emotion in music, you have multiple tools, right? So if you're just playing a song on the piano and you're singing, that's two different tools to showcase emotion. But when you start producing something, if you have a full orchestra, if you have other kind of electronic beats, things like that, you have all of these different tools to convey layered emotion. In a book, you have to build up the emotion in a different way. You have to use language, you have to use storytelling, you have to use these different kinds of tools. And I think while emotion in writing is vital, it's a very different approach. It's much more linear. In music, it is much more vertical and it's layered. So you might have your drums and your bass and your strings and your keys and your guitars and your horns and your vocals on top of that, and then maybe your effects. And all of those can help you point towards the same kind of thing, even if they're discordant. With a book, it's about the kind of journey, again, similar kind of idea that you're taking a journey in order to try and get people to feel something.
Fantastic. Okay. And our final question from the community, which is actually
Yes.
from me, I cheated because I wanted to ask this
Ah,
question.
ha,
This
ha.
is this is on being happy. And I love the acknowledgments of books because it really shows you, it not only reminds you that it takes an entire huge team of people to create a book, but also to build that author's life and make them who they are. But it's really just a window right into who you are.
Yeah.
And I want to focus on the very last lines that you wrote, and this was to your dad. And you said, quote, most of all, thank you to Gary Metzger. You pushed me to find things that make me happy. I think I finally have. And I know that you were very close to your dad. He was hugely influential in your life. And so I was wondering if you might have any parting advice, whether his or yours, for our audience on how to find their happinesses.
Yeah. So for context, my dad passed away almost 2 years ago now. And that was his parting advice for me. He saw that I was doing things in my life that were not making me happy. And so after he passed, I really spent a lot of time in self reflection, thinking about the things that would make me happy. That time, I spent more time doing something more than anything else. And that thing was listening. I was listening to both myself, but listening to the world around me. I did a lot of consuming of all different kinds of art. I was going to museums. I was watching movies and documentaries. I was reading books. I was playing music. And in doing all of these things, I was listening to what made everyone else in the world happy, but not just the thing that made them happy, why it made them happy. I would always ask people, what is it about music that makes you feel that way? What is it about sitting on a couch and reading a book that makes you feel that way? Because I really like thinking about process, right? And understanding the process of me trying to find the things that make me happy allowed me to go on this journey. For me, it was never going to be, I'm going to try pottery and I'm going to try candle making and I'm going to try all of these different. That was not for me because I wanted to go one step below that. What is the thing that I want to feel? Happiness is great. Happiness is kind of a big general emotion. But what are the more specific feelings? Like, what does fulfillment feel? What does nostalgia feel like? What are all of these kind of more specific emotions actually feel like? And how can I find things in the world that make me feel those things? So I looked at a lot of other people's journeys and I listened to their stories. And that really was key to get me to a place where I said, I want to write a book. Let's go.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know it's very personal, wonderful advice, though, and I feel blessed that we get to share in that with you. This was such a beautiful conversation, Adam. Thank you for being on the show. I hope everyone picks up a copy of Amplify, which is out now. And if they're lucky enough to be in a city near you where you're on tour, it sounds amazing. So thank you again, and best of luck, and don't be a stranger.
Thank you so much. This was so much fun.
Want more writing advice and career insight? Join thousands for free at creativeinspiredhappy.com to go behind the scenes with best-selling authors and get access to our book club for writers, creativity challenges, and more. I can't wait to see you there.